Hello everyone, my name is Laura and you are watching The Paranormal Scholar. Today is a little bit different. I'm joined by Erik. He's normally behind the camera and as you've noticed, we're in a very different set today. We're actually in the seance parlour at our Museum of the Paranormal and Spirituality based in Carmarthen, Wales.
So does that mean I'm the Paranormal Scholar now?
Do you want to be the Paranormal Scholar now?
But what would that make you though, if I take that?
Maybe it's time that I get an upgrade, I don't know. Paranormal Professor? I feel like I've learnt enough. Maybe I'm not a student anymore, so...
You're ready to graduate then?
I'm ready to graduate. So today we want to talk a little bit about demon houses, haunted houses, their stories and what we think of them, particularly how we consume that content as paranormal lovers. As I mentioned, we're in our new museum and we have many items here, including those of paranormal significance from locations that have infamous stories connected to them. So we have two pieces on the table here that are precisely that. First, I'll draw our attention to this one, which actually comes from the Demon House in Gary, Indiana, which was the feature of our last video on the channel. As we're going to talk about them, we have a couple of cat balls in front of them. So I'm going to turn these on now.
When we talk about phenomena, it seems to energize whatever is around us at this moment. And so we have put these cat balls here to sort of invite this sentient energy, if it exists there, to come and activate it and light it up for us and let us know they're there.
We often do find that when we talk about things, it seems to trigger activity. So these LED cat balls, they're cat toys, but they're quite commonly used in ghost hunts, in paranormal investigations. If you watch that sort of content, no doubt you've seen them used before. They're very simple. They have a tilt sensor in them where if they tilt, when a cat plays with them, they will illuminate. But it often seems that spectral little fingers like to trigger them as well. So they're quite simple. It may be that they illuminate as we go through this episode. It may be that they don't. If you enjoy this video, why not leave a like and a comment? Let us know what you think of this new format and whether you would like to see more like this. We have plenty of stories that we want to share with you, stories related to cases, related to objects, and also our personal opinions and experiences. So do go ahead and leave a comment to let us know what you think of this format and if you have any thoughts and feedback, and indeed if you have any opinions on the objects and the stories themselves. So this object up here is a little piece of a house, a very notorious house, which actually no longer exists because it was in fact demolished in 2016, and that is the notorious Demon House located in Gary, Indiana. So we covered this case in our last video on the channel, and it centers on the Ammons family, particularly Latoya Ammons, her 3 children, and her mother, Rosa Campbell, and what happened to them after they moved into a rental property in Gary, Indiana in November 2011. So there was a lot of paranormal activity, which ultimately escalated to the point of exorcism. The mother, Latoya, actually underwent 3 different exorcisms. They moved out of the house and ultimately it was purchased by paranormal investigator and the lead of Ghost Adventures, Zak Bagans.
One of the details I really like about this case is that there's over 800 pages of official documentation.
And that of course included Child Protective Services, various police departments, the hospital where the children were admitted, because this case became quite dramatic indeed. There was instances supposedly of levitation, loss of consciousness. One of the children of Latoya Ammons supposedly walked up a wall backwards and flipped over and then had no memory of that afterwards. Very much so, there was official involvement. The children of Latoya were even removed from her for a time and they underwent psychiatric evaluation, so there's documentation there also.
It seems also that most of the events and the haunting happened before even Zak Bagans famously got involved with the case.
Indeed, indeed. And that's something that I really wanted to talk about today, to see what we think of that. Because when we published the video, there was quite a lot of comments relating to Zak's involvement. and how our perception of a haunted house story potentially changes once it gets mass media attention. So I actually wanted to start by reading you a few comments that I noticed on Zak and his involvement in the Demon House case, and to pick at your brain a little bit to see what you think. I'm just pulling up a few comments that I saved here. So, for example, this one. This case could have presented a good case of study for any potential paranormal evidence, but that opportunity was wasted when Zak and his clowns bought the place for their dramatized pseudo-investigation for entertainment purposes.
I think that's quite unfair, isn't it? There's always going to be an element of, I don't want to say sensationalizing it, but they have to sort of jazz it up for the cameras. They have to sort of present the case to an audience in order for them to be receptive. They wouldn't do what they do if it didn't work, if it didn't attract people, didn't entertain people. There is an element of that. Doesn't mean that the case underneath is not genuine. I just think there's always going to be an element that they need to do something to make it a bit more spicy.
I agree with you. I would say I have two lines of thought there. So bridging off yours, that certainly even though we consume content, we see that very much as a one-sided conversation. Perhaps you have someone on the screen, much like I'm on the screen now, talking to you. It's easy to forget that it is actually a two-sided dialogue that's taking place there. So you're watching me now, I'm talking at you, I can't hear you back, but through your comments and your interaction with this video, will you watch it to the end? Will you watch it at all? Will you watch something else? And the same on television. It becomes a two-way dialogue. And you must remember that when you consider shows like Ghost Adventures, that they are responding to viewer feedback, either directly or indirectly. These shows are massively, massively popular because audiences enjoy them. So that's my one line of thought there. My second line of thought is that we mustn't forget that, as you pointed out, the bulk of this case took place long before Zak got involved.
Well, to further elaborate on the idea that it's done for entertainment, people have to remember is that there is no university, there is no academic institution that's state-funded, and people can look at paranormal phenomena very dryly and have many professors, just study it and not have to worry about, ratings and all these other things. Paranormal research and study is primarily funded through entertainment. That is how it is done today. So when Zak Bagans has to maybe put on a little bit of a show for the cameras, it does not mean that he's not studying the phenomena in earnest.
It's interesting that you say that, and I can almost hear the groans of people in the comments saying that there's no way that Zak Bagans or people like him actually investigate in earnest. But I do have a comment here from one of you on that video, which I found very interesting. And they're responding to somebody who is challenging the legitimacy of Zak's involvement. And they say, take this with a grain of salt, but I briefly worked with a local ghost hunting team that had once been tasked by his show to help orient them with a popular investigation location. And they said that while he and the team were goofy in their showboating, they took their investigating seriously, at least in front of my team. The problem is that they set the standard of being wild and crazy from their pilot they used to get the show out. It has the side effect of making him seem absolutely insufferable. He might have an ego too, but he didn't show it to the team. Very much so that you're seeing two sides of the same person, the person on camera and off camera. I think it's interesting how our perception of cases alter once they hit the mass media circuit.
It seems as soon as it became actually popular and well-known, and there was this, paranormal celebrity attached to it, then people started to heavily doubt it.
Well, they hadn't really heard of it before that 2014 press coverage. So it's like everybody saw that press coverage and thought, wow, this case is insane, it's incredible. And Zak Bagans had the same thought process as everyone else, and he just thought, I have the resources, I have to investigate this further. So everybody, it seems to me at least, had this collective awe and confusion and curiosity and shock about this case. But then as soon as it's presented to them in a different format later on, namely through Zak's documentary on the Demon House, perception began to change.
I wonder why that is. I wonder why that happens. That like I said, Zak Bagans becomes more about him. Like all the comments seem to be very centered on him. It's like this was going on before, and he just came in afterwards to investigate it himself.
I think we're naturally suspicious of things that are really put under our nose, and we're told, look at this, this is incredible. And that's what Zak's documentary did with the Demon House. That's the point of it, and that was the point of the news coverage. So I think people then start to take a step back. They're naturally skeptical of the paranormal and incredible things anyway, but when you have somebody really trying to push that onto you, we then wonder, do they have another reason for this? And so I think it's at this point, when we're having this conversation, it's almost impossible to talk about this sort of thing without mentioning the ultimate haunted house case, and that is the Amityville Horror.
Amityville, that is the quintessential haunted house case of our times, really. And something close to 50 films have been done about it.
It's been done to death, really, hasn't it? But we do actually have 2 pieces, relics from the Amityville house in front of us, 112 Ocean Avenue, specifically from a window that was original to the house at the time of not just the horrific mass murder that took place in 1974, but also during the residency of the Lutz family. Many things were claimed to have happened in the Amityville house during the Lutz time there. They weren't there for very long, but there was a long list of phenomena that ranged from ordinary, like cold spots and shadow figures and things like that, to the extreme. And some of the extreme examples actually center on the windows of the house. So we had things like Jody, the pig demon that the little girl in the house supposedly talked to at night. This entity was supposed to show itself through one of the windows in the property. There's also another story of the little boy, Danny. He had his hands on one of the windows was open, and supposedly it came down and horrifically crushed his hand. So windows play quite a prominent role in the story of the Amityville Horror. Even the image that we associate with the case, the house with its glowing eye-like windows, the windows are such a big part of it.
These windows were so iconic that the new owners of the house, after the Lutzes left, wanted to distance themselves from it being some horrible, haunted, demon-infested house.
Yeah, because the image of the house was just all over film and TV. It was very recognizable.
They wanted to get rid of them, so they just took them down and replaced them.
Yeah, they kept them in storage in their garage for about 40 years, actually. And it wasn't until a company that specializes in horror movie memorabilia was actually able to acquire them that they were packaged up, and that's how we got our little piece of them. So the reason we have them at the museum is, one, in part because of how popular the Amityville Horror is and how important it is in terms of paranormal culture, but also to test the idea of, if you have a piece of the whole, does it contain the whole itself?
Well, from our time having it, I think it does.
Yeah, we have a couple of strange stories actually relating to these, particularly the smaller of the two.
I saw you putting a little piece right here away in one of the cabinets we have here at the museum, and I was doing something else. I can't really remember what it was right now, but then I looked over at you, and the piece actually moved straight, made a beeline straight for your face, and you swatted it away like a fly.
I was very tired that day. We've been very busy setting this place up, and we actually only opened just before Halloween, so I'm still very tired, but I wasn't having it on that day. Like, I didn't know what was happening. I had just put it on the shelf, and the next thing I know, it's coming towards my face, so back in the cabinet it went.
You were completely unfazed, right?
I don't know, I'm desensitized, what can I say? But other than that, we've had other strangeness as well. So we do guided tours here at the museum, and whenever we get to the part of the tour that involves this little piece of wood, the light that prior to the tour beginning I've gone around and switched on is always off. It's always managed to turn itself off. And this doesn't happen with any of the other lights that we use. So it's a little LED light strip. I've actually got into the habit that I'll keep it off. I won't even bother wasting my time turning it on. And when we get to that part of the tour, then I'll turn it on. But even then, in the middle of us explaining the story of the Amityville Horror and this piece of wood, it will turn off in the middle of me talking. It's actually become quite something that we tell guests, this is why I'm turning it on now. Sometimes it goes off, but don't expect it to go off, but then it still does. It still goes off.
It's a very active item, that's for
It
sure.
certainly seems to be the case, which then brings us to, well, what actually happened at the Amityville house, and why does the Amityville Horror have, to be honest, such a bad reputation from the modern day perspective?
Well, one thing we do know about the Amityville house is that heinous crimes did happen there. That really happened there. There was somebody convicted for it. There was horrible happenings that happened there. If you take paranormal phenomena as a whole, the concept is that something bad happening leaves its mark.
Yes, definitely. So in 1974, Ronnie DeFeo Jr., he killed 6 of his family members as they slept in their beds. So his mother, his father, and his 4 siblings. As far as we know, it is a very clear case that he did this. He went and he shot them. They were all found face down. Strangely, it seemed like they hadn't moved or woken or tried to resist this horrific crime, this horrific mass murder taking place.
It is curious to note that when that occurred, that crime, that nobody heard the gunshots.
Not even the neighbors. I think somebody reported that they heard a dog barking, but the neighbors didn't seem to hear it either.
That somebody heard a dog barking, but not gunshots.
Yeah, it is strange. It is very, very strange. What happened that night, we don't know. Ronnie DeFeo is deceased now, so it seems like the true story will never come to light. But whatever the case may be, after this horrific thing happened, the Lutz family purchased the Amityville house and moved in.
And they had all the possessions of the DeFeos just still right there in the house.
Everything apart from the bloody mattresses, it seems. Even the bed frames were still there in the house.
I could not think of a better place for paranormal activity to occur.
Definitely. And paranormal activity did occur, according to Kathy and George Lutz. Everything from footsteps and cold spots, the sorts of things that are quite ordinary, if we can use that word, in other cases of hauntings, up to poltergeist type phenomena, so objects moving, for example, by themselves. And then the more extreme things, so supposedly levitations happened, the pig demon in the window, Jody, green goo coming out of the walls.
Well, green goo is a bit much, isn't it?
Exactly. So when people do criticize the Amityville case for being overly dramatized and sensationalized, definitely, I think green goo coming out of the walls is entirely deserving of that sort of skepticism.
Those sorts of claims don't really help out the case, do they?
No, not at all.
When something's been turned into that many films, that much of a legacy, and so much fictionalizing,
it's a circus.
it's a circus.
It becomes a circus. But once again, similar to the demon house, it's difficult to say that nothing happened. Clearly, we need to question the withholding of information and the sensationalizing of information that happened as the Amityville story came to light. And here, I think it's interesting to consider how the Lutzes claimed that they had no interest in the occult before moving in. Because in the aftermath of all of this, there has been things that have come out to the contrary of that, saying that George Lutz, the father of the house in particular, did have an interest. He had an interest in things like transcendental meditation, altered states of consciousness, maybe even telekinesis, spoon bending. I believe there's even one story of someone who claims that he was able to manifest like a green energy and to manipulate their perception of things in the room. This doesn't sound like somebody who wasn't interested in the occult.
Daniel Lutz, when the little boy that had his hands crushed at the time, when he grew up, actually attests to the fact that George was quite into the paranormal.
Yeah, he claims he would sneak down to the boathouse and he would see George and his friends all gathered together doing occult, well, probably shouldn't say that because it makes it sound like they're sacrificing somebody. I don't think they were doing occult rituals, but dabbling in psychic powers and things like that, I believe. So he saw that as a child when they were living in the Amityville house. So could it be that George was into this? He couldn't resist the dual temptation of a bargain property, but also a property that had paranormal intrigue for him, just as we're saying what might happen in a place that has seen such horrific actions take place. Might he have also thought that, and in a sense bit off more than he could chew? Was there genuine paranormal phenomena? Maybe not green goo coming out of the walls, but did something happen that did indeed scare him and scare his family to the point where they left? We bit off more than we could chew. It's out of control. We need to leave.
Well, it's interesting to note that during paranormal investigations, once you go into a place and you start asking questions, you start just prodding a little bit, phenomena does seem to increase. So George was going in there and poking at what happened. It's really likely that some paranormal phenomena would have occurred.
Yeah, and whilst all the family did claim to have experienced various different phenomena, a lot of it did seem to focus on George. He claims, and Kathy claims, that his mood deteriorated over the course of them living there. They were only in the house for a month, but even in the course of that time, he became more angry and withdrawn and aggressive and also cold. He was endlessly cold. The famous image is of him going down and chopping wood outside in order to fuel the fire, in order to keep warm. He just couldn't get warm, with cold spots, of course, being a very, very common thing that people report when experiencing a haunting. So I actually have a clip here that I want to share with you. So it comes from 1979, I believe, when the Lutzes were doing the publicity tour for the Amityville film. And they appeared on Good Morning America and had an interview about their experiences.
All right, let's do it.
Of course.
They look like eyes.
Yeah,
13 minutes of right now. Back in November 1975, 6 people were killed in an awful mass murder.
Did he say 1975?
I think so, yeah.
Did he get the date wrong?
I think so.
Well, I guess we're off to a bad start when they can't even get the date right. As regards to, we're assessing how factual their testimonies are, and the date's already wrong. Okay, honest mistake, potentially.
George and Kathleen Lutz are with us this morning to talk about what happened during those 28 days in Amityville. And James Brolin,
George
super young man, actor.
Thank you.
Yes, much pleasure. Good to see you again, Jim. He plays George Lutz in the movie, and Jim is with us this morning, and it's great seeing you again.
Great seeing you.
I'm sorry, that's so awkward. Look at his body language. The actor who plays George, his body language is so closed off sitting next to George. Presumably he did a character study on George. They would have spent time together. He's just so closed off to him. Anyway.
The book and the movie depict all these kind of weird, strange things that happened in the house during those 28 days when you were there. What kind of things, George, happened physically? What were some of the things that happened that scared you?
Well, at first, just moving into the house was fine. It's a lovely house.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed moving in. Within a week, Kathy's hand had been touched by something that we discussed and couldn't explain. It was just something unseen. Within...
I mean, this is in the daylight, or was it?
Yes,
It was during the day.
Right.
Okay.
We also had hordes of flies that would appear within 2 rooms. And no matter how many times we would kill them, they would reappear.
It's interesting as well, this is exactly what also happened in the demon house. The hordes of flies, they would kill them, and then they would just keep coming back.
Yeah, and you can look at that one of 2 ways. You can say, is this a symptom of diabolical infestation, flies? Or is it that there's something not quite right about the demon house story and they are mimicking what is undoubtedly a very popular and well-known haunting, with over 40 films having been made about it, and they're just mirroring that. But certainly it could be that there's a similarity because it's true. Who knows?
What was that on the wall in the movie? This green slime comes out of the walls, right? George, did that happen?
As the movie did it, not exactly, no.
Yeah.
It was more...
Okay, so that's interesting because we picked up on the green goo as being something that's very easy to attack as falsified, undoubtedly. But he is instantly saying, actually, it didn't happen exactly as it's presented in the film or the book. So let's just go back a little bit and hear what he's going to say about that.
Comes out of the walls, right? George, did that happen?
As the movie did it, not exactly, no.
Yeah.
It was more of a gelatin kind of substance that we thought the children had somehow mixed something up and spilled it around the house. The next time it happened, the kids were at school, and there was just no way to explain how it got there.
Did you all call, a contractor or a carpenter or anybody to come and look and try to?
We had several repairs.
I mean, it's also interesting that as he's presenting the story, he instantly adds in an attempt to debunk and explain by saying, well, we thought it was the children, but then they were at school. So either he's very smart at lying and trying to draw you in and make you believe he's just a normal person experiencing this horrific thing and he went through all the usual logical steps in order to explain it, or it actually did happen like that.
Well, it's convincing, isn't it? If you do have something weird happen like that in the house, you might dismiss it the first time.
Telephone repairman came 3 times because each time we would try and communicate with the priest, we would run into faulty connections. We had extreme fluctuations in the heat.
So again, something that's quite commonplace, electrical anomalies in their case, telephonic anomalies when they tried to reach out to the priest. So that's interesting. And since we've moved into this building, we've had quite a few electrical and internet anomalies also.
Yes, definitely.
They said what? Did they say they had 3 repairmen? How many repairmen have we had out?
I lost count at 5.
I think it was 6. So our internet broke when we moved in. It's working now, thankfully. But we had horrific trouble with the internet. It broke and we ended up having 6 different engineers come out in order to fix it. So
Fingers crossed it's currently working.
yeah, and was it paranormal? Maybe. We've also had in the same part of the building fire alarms going off mysteriously, lights on and off. But that's another story. But yes, it is something that's commonly reported.
One time he was there, he heard the furnace functioning, and yet there was no heat within the house. The temperature was at 40, and yet thermostat read 80.
Okay, no, but you had somebody in...
So saying that they seem to have temperature fluctuations, but the house surely was vacant, I think they said for a year before they purchased it after the DeFeo murders. So again, at least that element of the story could be chalked up to an ordinary explanation, right?
Yeah, you would think so, wouldn't you? That leaving a house empty for that long is going to have some issues with condensation or something like that.
Yeah, and maybe that would also go some way to explaining the goo. I don't know if they've taken a house which has stood empty for so long and then suddenly put heat into it. Like you said, condensation could play a part in that.
George, there was also something about black in the toilets, the water black and making the ceramic, the bowls or whatever black.
The china itself, it wasn't in the water. The china itself turned black, and at first it was one bathroom and then another and then another, so that by the time the investigators got there, a number of them was still black. It was still that way. There was never any reasonable explanation.
Did you have a plumber come in?
Once again, a house has stood empty for a long time. You could get plumbing issues, heating issues, electrical issues. Houses are meant to be lived in. That's not to discredit other experiences that they had, but that's also something, right? When something strange starts happening in a property and you acknowledge that's strange, that shouldn't be happening, then everything that goes wrong becomes lumped in with the strangeness.
Yes, absolutely. And also it would be interesting to see where, the water was sourced from it, if there was actually some sort of corrosion in the pipes that they didn't sense or they couldn't detect. There could be any number of explanations.
It's picking apart what is potentially paranormal and what's potentially not, rather than losing your head a little bit and umbrellaing everything under paranormal.
One of the things we found was the keyholes would ooze a black substance, which was of the same nature and appearance as that which was on the porcelain in the toilets. And when the investigative team came on March 6, 1976, the substance was still on the keyholes, and they were able to obtain samples of it because it was never in a moist condition.
Right.
And they wouldn't do physical damage to the door, in other words, carve out a piece of wood without our consent.
Had either of you had any experience before with...
So did they not give their consent then?
So they examined the black substance.
So they said that the black substance that was on the porcelain of the toilet bowl was also on the doors and in the door locks, and that it was still there when the investigators came in, but the investigators weren't able to take a sample because that would have involved removing part of the door, and they couldn't have done it without the Lutz's consent, which is then implied that the Lutz's didn't give consent for that to happen.
I guess that's a bit suspicious.
That is, especially when they then went on to work with the author of the Amityville Horror and the film and be on TV and do all these interviews. You think that they would have, they've invited the investigators in, well then why not let them take the sample?
Yeah. And when you think about how many conditions can happen to old wooden features in a house, really needs to have a sample taken from
Yeah, and also, this has ruined your life, supposedly. You ran out after 28 days. I would want to know. If you have to cut into that door, I want to know what's going on. I want to know a good reason as to why my life and my family has been uprooted by this.
Had either of you had any experience before with the occult or the supernatural, ever before?
We didn't believe in it.
Were you afraid for your children? Why didn't you leave earlier than the 28 days if you were terrified?
I don't think that's true.
Well,
I don't think that's true, George. I think you're a dabbler.
It was our house. First of all, we had never intended to give it up. Even after we moved out, we intended to find out what was wrong and move back in there.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to find out what was wrong. Well, then why not take a sample of the door? I don't know. I mean, this is another thing that when we analyze cases, it's easy to take the very perfect perspective that everybody is sane and rational and logical all the time. Human beings are not that. We do not make sense. So is it that what they're saying does not make sense 100% of the time because they're lying? Or is it because they're human and humans don't make sense?
Jim, you played George in the movie, and you did research this and worked on it and so forth. You smiled. Do you believe them?
Do I? Yeah, when I'm sitting here with them, yes, I do. And I've watched George, and I've watched, you know, you've been an actor, David, and you kind of know how to watch for telltale signs when you're doing research and watching to people, and we also, well, you get an insight. And I can't say that looking over the story, I believe the book as it's presented totally. But sitting with these people, it's hard to deny a lot of the facts, too.
Were you
George
frightened?
gave up a lot of money.
Yeah. Were you
More than
frightened
I
playing?
think that he would make on the book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
One of the things
Why would you keep up working on this if it was terrifying and not a pleasant experience? Why don't you just leave it behind you and forget it and move on to other things?
Things of this nature happen quite frequently. And when they happen
To you?
families, no, not to us.
yeah.
This was something we learned from the investigators and the psychics that came in. And when it happens to a family, usually they close the door and they don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And unless these things are talked about, they'll never be understood.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point that Kathy raises there, and we come across this all the time, that behind closed doors, you would be surprised by how much happens to people in terms of paranormal phenomena, and most people do not talk about it. It is a shameful thing, and because of that, it's not considered real at a societal level.
When we tell people that we do the paranormal scholar and we research the paranormal, they almost seem really happy to let go of their dirty little secret about their particular paranormal happenings.
Everyone has a story.
I did find James Brolin's answer a bit, I don't know, it was a bit odd. He was, yes, when I'm sitting here next to them, I do believe them.
You did. You think he didn't want to say? His body language was so close after them, and they're sitting so close to each other on that little settee.
He wanted to get away from him. He was like this, like moving off the side of the chair, wasn't he, at one point?
That's strange. I wonder if through watching George and speaking to him, his opinion of the story changed, like negatively, you know, and he doesn't want to say it because the man's sitting there right next to him.
Is the movie fun?
Well, the movie's very effective, I think. And I'll tell you, when I was sent this script, and you know, we're all at the mercy of scripts in this business, I read it.
He doesn't like the story, does he? He doesn't like George. We're all at the mercy of scripts, and I don't think much of this one.
I was working on another picture, and I didn't have much time, and I read it quickly, and you wanted an answer.
Didn't have much time. What does I get myself into?
Oh, God.
Dear me.
And I just thought this is going to make a terrific movie. And when I called, I said, let's get involved, and the agency said, why don't you pick up the book tomorrow? And I said, oh, yeah, there's a book. And then the next day I found out it was a true story. I wasn't aware of it. And so my involvement from the beginning was really sort of naive. Mm-hmm. And I just took it as something that was going to be a wonderful movie, and it is. I didn't realize what I was getting into.
Regrets?
I love that story. That's really good.
He didn't realize what he was getting into next to these two right here.
Well,
I don't know, that's interesting.
He's like really busy, he gets a script. Oh, well, that sounds like an interesting story. Yeah, I'll do that. I was like, oh, it's true? What?
Yeah.
And then he gets like sucked into the rabbit hole. I was like, he may have agreed too quickly then.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what sort of private conversations they had. And yeah, interesting.
George and Kathy Lutz, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
It was.
Well, it was very interesting seeing them talk about their experience firsthand. They seem very soft-spoken.
Yeah, they seem compelling.
They seem, but once we know that George was actually into the occult and how easily he said, oh no, I never touched that stuff.
He didn't even counter it by saying, well, I wasn't into demons, but I did have an interest in altered states of consciousness and transcendental meditation, which is actually admitted in the end of the notes at the end of the novel. He didn't even try and counter it. He didn't try and contextualize it. He just went straight in with, no, not at all. We didn't believe in any of that. I find that suspicious.
I would also say that, you know, he's saying he's into this specific type of meditation. Sounds like he knows quite a bit about that. So to not have run across these topics in that time, if you're into that, is, you know, I think it would be really difficult.
Yeah, and also only a couple of years prior to all of this, The Exorcist came out. Yeah. So to say that you didn't, it's tricky really to say that, to claim such ignorance of this sort of subject matter.
I find this a lot with paranormal phenomena in general, that people are always just like, whether it be aliens, poltergeists or whatever, the family never was interested into it.
No, that is always the case. And you're right to bring up aliens there. Whenever there's an abduction story, it's like, I didn't know anything about aliens. I didn't know what a flying saucer was. This is all completely new to me. It is very odd. Obviously, we're massively into the paranormal and strangeness of all sorts. But I couldn't imagine man on the street today saying, I have absolutely no knowledge about UFOs, aliens, ghosts, demons. It's disingenuous. And I think for someone to say, actually, I did have a bit of an interest, or I did watch The Exorcist, and or I did read this book on transcendental meditation, that's not going to discredit you. I'm not going to then look at you and say, well, you made it all up because you had a pre-existing interest. I don't think that's the case. I think that's just being honest.
But Kathy does talk about the fact that people want to always keep this stuff to themselves, that are scared to. And then you have to ask, when somebody opens themselves up to that, they might feel defensive, highly defensive. This sort of questioning, back and forth, looking at it, this all happens with these sort of cases once they hit the media circus. You know, whether it be films, television, and so much, whether it be Amityville, Demon House, or a whole host of other cases.
Yeah. I think if I came to you in confidence, two people maybe were colleagues, and I said to you, hey, I've been experiencing something strange in my home and me and my family experienced this, that, and the other, I think you would be much more willing to believe me on a person-to-person level than if I went to the press and you heard about it through the television. I think our perception does change once it hits the media circuit. And that's because we're inherently suspicious of why we're being told this story. And surely it can't be true. But it stands to reason that if people are having these experiences privately, that some of them will reach the media, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they change from being believable to unbelievable and fraudulent.
Surprised by how quiet these objects have been.
They have been very well behaved, particularly because we do actually have the little piece of the demon house outside of its case. Normally we keep things behind a barrier and use different protective mechanisms to try and contain their energy, but they have been very quiet. Any final words from you? You wanna? I'm just gonna check it's actually still on. No, it is still on. So there you go. It doesn't seem like they have any comments to give on the case of the Demon House and the Amityville Horror, but maybe you do. So why not go ahead and leave a comment? We'd love to read them, even if we don't always reply to every single one. We're there, we're reading and appreciating all the comments that you leave. And of course, if you enjoyed this format, this new format on the channel, go ahead and let us know. Maybe give us some feedback. What might you like to see in the next episode? And of course, did you enjoy having Erik here with me? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more of the paranormal. And why not watch one of my previous episodes, such as the video on the Demon House as suggested on screen now. Thank you again. Until next time.